Every Sunday, my husband would stay late at work. But one day, he left his phone at home, and a woman called, "Honey, are you on your way?" I silently drove to that address. When I opened the door, I saw... Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had the kind of marriage people envied. Not the showy kind. Not the matching outfits at Christmas parties or the kissing selfies on Instagram. Ours was quieter than that. Steadier. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years, and somewhere in that span of time we had built something I genuinely believed was real. A house in Connecticut with a garden I tended on weekends. 2 cats named after jazz musicians, Miles and Coltrane. A shared mortgage, shared habits, shared silences that never felt uncomfortable. He was an engineer at a mid-sized firm in Hartford. I was a high school English teacher. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. We were, I thought, fine. More than fine. We were solid. Looking back now, I can see the cracks had been there for at least a year before I noticed them. Maybe longer. I just wasn't looking. Because why would I? You don't inspect a foundation you believe is sound. The first thing I noticed was the Sundays. Daniel had always worked hard, but his hours had been predictable. Monday through Friday, home by 6:30, weekends mostly free. Then, sometime in the spring of last year, he started staying late at the office on Sundays. Not every Sunday at first, once or twice a month, then every week, without fail. He always had an explanation ready, a deadline, a client in a different time zone, a report that couldn't wait until Monday. The explanations were reasonable. They sounded like Daniel. Careful, responsible, never dramatic. I believed them because I had no reason not to, because he was my husband and I trusted him. But trust, I've learned, is not the same as blindness. And there is a particular kind of quiet unease that settles into your chest when something is wrong and you can't name it yet. I started noticing other things, small things. The way he'd check his phone more frequently, not in an obvious, guilty way, but with a kind of focused attention that felt private. The way he showered the moment he walked through the door on Sunday evenings, before dinner, before even taking off his shoes. Once I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from a restaurant on the other side of Hartford. A nice place, not the kind you go to alone, dated on a Sunday afternoon. When I asked him about it, he said he'd had a working lunch with a client. He said it easily, without hesitation. His eyes didn't flicker. I folded the receipt and put it back. I didn't say anything else. That was the first crack I let myself see. By July, I had begun to construct a quiet inventory of anomalies. He was more attentive at home, almost deliberately so, bringing me coffee on Saturday mornings, suggesting movies he knew I liked. It felt less like love and more like compensation. And then there was the distance underneath it all. The way conversations ended a little too cleanly. The way his laugh sometimes arrived a half-second too late, like it was practiced. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this is what 11 years looks like. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the Sunday in August that changed everything. He left in the morning as usual, kissed me on the cheek, said he'd be home by 7, took his keys. What he didn't take was his phone. He'd left it face down on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. I noticed it about 20 minutes after he left, and I remember standing there thinking I should text his office line, let him know. I remember picking it up. I wasn't going to look at it. I want to be clear about that. I set its screen up on the counter, intending to leave it there, and then it lit up. The name on the screen was saved simply as K. The message read, "Sweetheart, are you on your way yet?" I stood very still. The kitchen was quiet. Miles the cat walked across the counter and I didn't even register him. I just stared at those 7 words until they stopped being letters and became something else. A door opening into a room I hadn't known existed in my own house. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I set it back down, face up, exactly where it had been. And then I picked up my own keys, walked to my car, and drove to the address I found. Because Daniel, careful and responsible Daniel, had left his GPS history unlocked. The same 3 destinations cycling through his recent routes every Sunday for the past 4 months. I knew the street. I'd driven past it 100 times. It was 12 minutes from our house. What would you do if your hands were steady and your chest felt like concrete and you realized you had been sharing your life with a stranger? I parked. I walked to the door. I knocked. The woman who opened the door was younger than me, not dramatically so, maybe 5 or 6 years, but enough that I registered it immediately, the way you register a discrepancy in a document you've been reading carefully. She was pretty in an uncomplicated way. Light brown hair, bare feet, a loose linen shirt. She was holding a glass of iced tea. For one suspended second, neither of us spoke. Then she understood. I watched it happen on her face, the color draining, the glass lowering slowly, the particular expression of someone who has just been confronted with a consequence they thought was theoretical. Daniel appeared behind her a moment later. He came out of the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel, and when he saw me standing in the doorway, he stopped moving entirely. I have replayed that moment many times since. The way his face went through shock, then something that looked almost like relief, as if the waiting were finally over, and then, very quickly, a careful blankness. "Rachel," he said. That was all he said. Just my name. As if I had shown up unexpectedly at a party. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I looked at the apartment, the Sunday afternoon domesticity of it, the candles on the table, the 2 plates set out, the whole ordinary intimacy of it, and I understood with complete clarity that this had not been a mistake or a single lapse. This was a life. He had been living a second life in a Sunday apartment 12 minutes from our house, and I had been the woman who fed the cats and graded papers and thought she was fine. I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for a long time. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and began to think. I want to describe what grief felt like in those first hours, because people always assume it's loud. It wasn't. It was a kind of cold arithmetic. I sat there and I counted. 11 years, 2 incomes pooled into one account. A house with my name and his name on the deed. A retirement account we'd built together. A social life intertwined with his colleagues, his family, mutual friends who would now become a terrain I'd have to navigate. A identity, wife, partner, us, that I would have to dismantle and replace with something I couldn't yet picture. The losses were staggering when I laid them out plainly, and underneath them was something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not heartbreak, though those came later, but fear. A very specific, practical fear. What happens to me now? What happens to the house? What happens to the 12 years of financial planning, the credit we'd built together, the life insurance policy with his name on it? I was 41 years old and I had organized my entire adult life around a partnership that had just been revealed as, at least partially, a fiction. Daniel came home at 9 o'clock that night. I was sitting in the living room with the lights on, Miles on my lap, a cup of tea gone cold beside me. He sat down across from me, and he did what I think many people in his position do. He tried to explain, not to confess, not to apologize, to explain. He talked for a long time about unhappiness and disconnection and things having changed between us. He cried once, briefly. He asked me not to make any decisions right away. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said, "How long?" He paused. 8 months. 8 months. Every Sunday for 8 months. I had cooked dinner on those Sundays. I had kept the porch light on. I told him he should sleep in the guest room. He nodded and went upstairs. I sat there for another hour. And somewhere in that hour, the fear began to transform into something more useful. Not anger. Anger is reactive, and reactive is dangerous when you have real things at stake. What I felt was closer to resolve. A cold, deliberate, highly focused resolve. I was an English teacher. I was good at close reading. I was good at finding meaning in what was on the page and what wasn't. And I understood, sitting in that living room with the cat on my lap and the cold tea at my elbow, that what happened next would determine the rest of my life. I couldn't afford to be reckless. I couldn't afford to scream or threaten or beg. I needed to be methodical. The plan began forming that night, quietly, the way a good argument does, one premise at a time. First, I would document everything. Not because I needed grounds for divorce in Connecticut, it's a no-fault state, but because documentation changes power. Second, I would consult a divorce attorney before Daniel had any idea I was thinking about legal steps. The element of preparation was mine to use. Third, I would not confront him again until I understood exactly what I was entitled to and exactly what I wanted. I went upstairs, walked past the guest room where I could hear him breathing, and lay down in our bed. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I had 11 years of evidence that I was not someone who gave up easily. That had built this life once. I could build another one. But first, I was going to make sure this one was properly closed. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, which I hadn't done in years. There was a particular clarity to the early light through the bedroom curtains, the kind of sharp August light that doesn't soften anything. I lay there for exactly 3 minutes. Then I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop. I searched for divorce attorneys in Hartford County. I didn't look for the cheapest. I didn't look for the closest. I looked for the one with the best reviews specifically from women navigating contested asset cases. Her name was Patricia Okafor. Her firm was in West Hartford. Her earliest available appointment was Wednesday at 2 o'clock. I booked it before Daniel came downstairs. When he appeared in the kitchen, unshaven, wearing the clothes he'd slept in, looking diminished in a way I hadn't seen before, I was already on my second cup of coffee, dressed for work, grading papers at the table as if it were a normal Monday. I think he expected tears, or silence, or another confrontation. He got none of those things. I said good morning. I asked if he wanted coffee. He stood in the doorway looking at me with an expression I can only describe as wary, the way you look at weather you can't quite read. "Rachel," he started. "I have to get to school," I said. "We can talk tonight if you need to." I left him standing in the kitchen. That act, of being composed, of being unremarkable, was the first move in a game I hadn't yet named but had already begun. At school, I went through the day mechanically but competently. I taught 2 sections of junior English, sat through a department meeting, ate lunch alone in my classroom. In the 30 minutes between the last bell and faculty parking lot, I sat at my desk and made a list on a legal pad, not of grievances, of assets. The house was purchased in 2016. We had put down $60,000, of which $38,000 had come from my savings account before the marriage. The remaining equity, built over 8 years of joint mortgage payments, was substantial. The retirement accounts, his 401k, my 403b, both opened during the marriage and therefore subject to equitable distribution under Connecticut law, or so I believed. I wrote down every financial instrument I could name. I wrote down the joint checking account, the joint savings, the car we'd paid off last year. I wrote down the credit card with both our names on it. Then I wrote down a second column, what I didn't know. Did he have accounts I wasn't aware of? Had money been moved? 8 months is a long time. How much of our shared income had been redirected, restaurant bills, hotel stays, gifts, toward the Sunday apartment 12 minutes away? That second column scared me more than the first. Wednesday came. Patricia Okafor's office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian in West Hartford, tasteful and serious, the kind of space that communicated competence without ostentation. She was in her mid-50s, calm in the way that people who have seen everything become calm, and she listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. Then she gave me my first real education. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, she said. That doesn't mean 50-50. It means the court looks at the totality, length of marriage, contributions of each party, economic circumstances. Your premarital contribution to the down payment is documentable and will be considered. She paused. The more important question right now is whether there has been dissipation of marital assets. If your husband has been spending joint funds on this relationship, that is legally significant. She recommended a forensic accountant. She recommended I gather 3 years of bank statements, credit card records, and tax returns, all of which I had legal access to as a joint account holder. She told me to do this quietly and quickly. Don't tip your hand, she said. Not yet. I drove home with a folder of intake paperwork and a retainer agreement I'd signed with the last of my personal savings buffer. My hands on the wheel were completely steady. That evening, while Daniel watched television in the living room, I sat in the small home office we shared, the one with the filing cabinet I had organized and maintained for 11 years, and I began pulling documents, bank statements, tax returns, credit card records going back to January. I photographed everything with my phone, uploaded it to a private cloud account I'd created that afternoon under an email address Daniel didn't know existed. It was on the third credit card statement, March of this year, that I found it. A charge I didn't recognize, a recurring monthly payment to a property management company I'd never heard of, $150 every month from November of the previous year through July. I sat very still, 9 months of payments, $16,650 total from our joint credit card. He had been paying her rent, or his rent there, our money I had earned teaching 5 classes a semester, money I had contributed to every month, had been funding the Sunday apartment. I photographed the statement 3 times. I uploaded it. I sat back in the chair and felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction, not anger, certainty. The clean, structural certainty of someone who now has exactly what they need. I was past the point of hoping this was a mistake. I texted Patricia Okafor that night, found recurring joint CC charges to a property management company, 9 months, $16,650, photographed and uploaded. Her response came 11 minutes later. Excellent, don't touch the account. We'll discuss next steps Thursday. In the living room, I could hear the television. Daniel was watching a baseball game. He had no idea that the ground beneath his careful, compartmentalized life had just shifted completely. Neither did she. Patricia filed the divorce petition on a Thursday morning in the first week of September. I know the exact day because I remember the particular quality of the light in her office, low, autumnal, slanting through the blinds, and the sound of the printer producing the documents that would formally begin the dissolution of 11 years of my life. I signed where she indicated. My hand didn't shake. Daniel was served at his office at 11:15 the same morning. Patricia had arranged for a process server. Efficient, professional, no drama. I was teaching a lesson on The Great Gatsby when it happened. I found out the timing afterward and thought, not without some dark humor, that the novel was appropriate. The call came that evening. I was in the kitchen when Daniel walked through the front door. Not the composed, careful Daniel of the past week, but a different version. Pale, jaw tight, holding the envelope. He stood in the kitchen doorway with it in his hand and looked at me as if I had done something that violated an agreement he believed we had. "You didn't talk to me first," he said. "I did talk to you," I said. "You talked for 2 hours and told me about your feelings. I listened. Then I made a decision." He tried several approaches in the following 30 minutes. First, the appeal to reason. We should try counseling. We should not make this adversarial. There were things we could work out. Then the appeal to shared history. 11 years. The house. The life we'd built. Then, and this was the one I had been expecting, the appeal to fear. Did I understand what this was going to cost both of us? Did I know what a contested divorce would do to our finances? I let him finish. Then I said, "I found the credit card charges. The property management company. 9 months, $6,500 a month. Would you like to discuss that?" The silence that followed was long and very specific. It was the silence of someone recalculating. He left the kitchen. He went upstairs. He was on his phone for a long time. I would later understand he was calling her. Her name, I had by then established through the property records Patricia's office had pulled, was Kristen Mercer. She was 35, a marketing consultant, living in the apartment my husband had been partly financing since the previous November. She was not, as it turned out, a passive participant. Within 48 hours of the petition being filed, I began to understand that. The first sign was a voicemail on my cell phone from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, calm and deliberate. "Rachel, I think we should talk. Woman to woman. There's a lot here you don't understand, and I think you're about to make decisions that hurt everyone, including yourself. Call me." I saved the voicemail, forwarded the audio file to Patricia, and did not call back. The second sign was more significant. Patricia called me on a Saturday to tell me that Daniel's attorney, he had retained one quickly, a man named Garrett Walsh, who specialized in high-asset divorce cases, had made an opening argument that my premarital contribution to the down payment was undocumentable. They were, in effect, contesting my claim to the larger share of the home equity. "Can they win that argument?" I asked. "Not if you have the bank records from the account the funds came from," Patricia said. "Do you?" I did. I had kept every financial record for 11 years in the filing cabinet I'd organized, including the wire transfer confirmation from my personal account in my name alone, opened before the marriage, that had funded the majority of our down payment in 2016. I emailed the document to Patricia within the hour. The third sign was the most direct. On a Tuesday evening, Kristen Mercer was sitting in a car across the street from my house. I noticed her when I came home from school. A silver Audi, engine running, parked where I would see it. She wasn't trying to hide. She wanted me to know she was there. I went inside. I texted Patricia. I did not go back out. Patricia sent a formal communication to Garrett Walsh's office the following morning. Any contact with me, direct or implied, by either Daniel or Kristen Mercer, would be documented and presented to the court as harassment. The silver Audi did not appear again. The process over the following weeks was not dramatic. It was paperwork. It was a forensic accountant named Diane who spent 3 weeks analyzing 3 years of joint financial records and identified $23,400 in dissipated marital assets. The rent, the restaurant bills, the weekend. I now understood Daniel had claimed was a work conference in Newport. It was depositions and discovery and the grinding administrative machinery of a legal system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Through all of it, I went to work. I graded papers. I tended the garden on weekends because the tomatoes didn't care about my marriage. I fed Miles and Coltrane. I called my sister in Portland twice a week and my mother in Ohio on Sundays. I did not talk about the case to colleagues. I did not post anything on social media. I moved through my days with deliberate, careful composure. But underneath it, I was exhausted in a way I had never been before. Not from the work, from the sustained effort of being rational when everything in me wanted to not be. The effort of protecting what I had built with the same energy that had built it in the first place. One Friday afternoon in late September, Patricia called to tell me Garrett Walsh had requested a 30-day extension on asset disclosure. A standard delay tactic, she said, designed to exhaust the opposing party. "They're hoping you'll get tired or scared," she said. "It's very common." I told her to respond that we were ready to proceed on the original schedule. Then I got in my car, drove to the Connecticut shoreline, checked into a small inn I'd stayed at once before with a friend, and spent 3 days reading, walking on the beach, and sleeping 9 hours a night. I needed the rest, not because I was giving up, because what was coming next would require everything I had, and I wasn't going to arrive at it depleted. I came back from the shore on a Monday morning, and the first thing I did was open my email. There were 42 new messages. Most were ordinary. School administration, subscription services, a reminder about my dentist appointment. 2 were not. The first was from Garrett Walsh's office, forwarded by Patricia, a settlement proposal. Daniel was offering to let me keep the house outright in exchange for a clean split of all liquid assets, and both retirement accounts divided equally, with no acknowledgement of dissipation. On its face, it looked generous. It was, in fact, a trap. The house carried the mortgage, and without a proportional share of the retirement accounts factored against the dissipation finding, I would be taking on debt while surrendering the savings I'd need to service it. It was a proposal designed to look like concession while actually redistributing advantage. I forwarded it to Patricia with 3 words. Not even close. The second message was more unexpected. It came from a personal email address. Kristen Mercer's name in the sender field, not disguised at all. The message was long. It was, in places, almost articulate. She wrote that she understood I was in pain. She wrote that she had not set out to hurt anyone. She wrote that Daniel had told her things about our marriage, that we had been unhappy for years, that we had been living as roommates, that I had emotionally checked out long before she entered the picture. She presented herself as a woman who had also been deceived. She asked me to consider whether my real enemy was her or the institution of a marriage that had already failed. It was skillfully written. I read it twice. Then I thought about the voicemail from 2 weeks earlier. Woman to woman, there's a lot you don't understand. And I thought about the silver Audi parked across my street, and I thought about the 9 months of rent paid on a joint credit card I was also servicing, and I thought, this is not a woman reaching out in good faith. This is a woman protecting her position. I did not respond. I forwarded the email to Patricia. What I did instead that week was something I had been putting off for too long. I let people in. I had kept the situation private since August. My sister Laura knew the broad outlines. Husband had been unfaithful, divorce proceedings underway, but not the details. My closest friend, Margot, who taught biology at the same high school and had known me for 14 years, knew nothing at all. I had protected the information out of some instinct I couldn't fully name, pride perhaps, or the same composure instinct that had served me in the attorney's office but was starting to cost me something in isolation. On Wednesday evening, I drove to Margot's house. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in. I'll open a bottle." I told her everything. Not a summarized version. Everything. The Sundays, the phone, the GPS, the door, the credit card charges, the attorney and the forensic accountant and the settlement proposal, Kristen Mercer's email, all of it. Margot listened the way she always listened, fully, without interrupting, without performing sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me specifically?" It was the right question. Not "that's terrible," or "I can't believe him," or "what are you going to do?" But, "What do you need?" I thought about it seriously. "I need someone who knows the whole picture," I said, "so I'm not carrying it alone." "Okay," she said. "I know the whole picture. What else?" "I might need you to tell me when I'm being irrational." "You haven't been irrational once in what you just described," she said. "But yes." I also called Laura. My sister was less measured than Margot. She was furious on my behalf in the way that only someone who loves you without complication can be. But underneath the fury, she was practical. She was a paralegal in Portland, and when I told her about the dissipation findings, she immediately asked whether Patricia had included a prejudgment interest calculation. I didn't know. She told me to ask. Patricia, when I conveyed the question, said it was an excellent point and added it to the filing. That week, something in me reconfigured, not softened, reconfigured. The isolation I had been maintaining in the name of composure had been a form of unnecessary weight, and setting it down didn't make me weaker. It made the composure more sustainable. Daniel, meanwhile, had gone quiet. His attorney's office sent no further communications after Patricia's rejection of the settlement proposal. I assumed this meant they were recalibrating. Patricia assumed the same. Kristen Mercer sent no further emails. I noticed at some point that week that the thing I'd been calling fear, the cold concrete sensation that had sat in my chest since August, had changed quality. It was still present, but it had stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like fuel. I went back to work. I graded essays on The Great Gatsby. One of my students wrote about the green light, the thing Gatsby reaches for that is always across the water, always almost within reach, always receding. She wrote, "Maybe the point is that some things should stay across the water." I wrote excellent insight in the margin and thought, yes, some things should. What was across my water now wasn't a person or a marriage. It was a version of my life that was fully mine, and I was not going to let anyone else determine whether I reached it. It was a Sunday, of all days, when they came. I was in the garden when I heard the car in the driveway. The tomatoes needed staking, and the morning had been quiet in the way autumn mornings in Connecticut can be. Cool light, geese somewhere overhead, the particular stillness of a season that's winding down. Miles was on the porch, watching me with the judicial disinterest of cats. I heard the car, straightened up, and walked around to the front of the house. Daniel's Volvo, and behind it the silver Audi. They were standing in my driveway together. Daniel was in the clothes he wore when he wanted to look sincere. Dark jeans, a simple navy jacket, nothing flashy. Kristen Mercer was in a cream-colored coat, her hair neat. They looked, standing side by side on my driveway on a Sunday morning, like a unit, like a thing that had already decided it had rights here. I stopped at the corner of the house. I looked at them. I did not move toward them. "Rachel," Daniel said. He had practiced the tone, reasonable, non-threatening, the voice of a man trying to de-escalate. "We just want to talk. 5 minutes. No attorneys." "This is my property," I said. "You're on it without an invitation." "I know, and I'm sorry for that," he said, which was the first time he had used that word to me since August. "But things are getting... The legal process is escalating in a way that's going to hurt both of us. We wanted to talk to you directly, person to person." I looked at Kristen Mercer. She was watching me with an expression I recognized from the email. Carefully calibrated empathy, the look of someone trying to appear non-threatening while standing in your driveway. "I have nothing to say to her," I said. "Rachel." He stepped forward slightly. "I know you're angry. I know I hurt you. But you're making decisions right now that are going to permanently destroy things that don't need to be destroyed. The house, if this goes to trial, neither of us walks away whole. The accounts, You should talk to Patricia Okafor," I said. "Everything goes through her. That's exactly the problem." And here the tone shifted, just slightly, just enough. The reasonableness developed an edge. "You've handed everything to an attorney whose entire financial incentive is to escalate this. Okafor is billing you by the hour, Rachel. Every week this drags on, she makes more money. Have you thought about that?" It was not a bad argument strategically. It was the kind of thing designed to plant doubt, not in the outcome, but in the process, in the advisor I'd chosen, in my own judgment. It was designed to make me feel that my protections were working against me. "I have thought about it," I said. "I thought about it when I chose her. She came highly recommended by 3 different sources, and her track record is documented. Is there something else?" He looked at Kristen. Something passed between them. Then she spoke for the first time. Her voice was what I'd heard on the voicemail, practiced even. "Rachel, I know you don't have any reason to listen to me. I know how this looks. But I think you deserve to know some things that Daniel hasn't been honest with you about the marriage, about what he told me." I looked at her directly. "What he told you about the marriage was told to justify what he wanted to do. I've been in marriages before, by which I mean I've read extensively about how people in them behave. Men who are having affairs do not narrate their unhappy marriages accurately to the people they're having affairs with. That's not how it works." A pause. "I'm not interested in your version of my marriage," I continued, "and I'm not interested in whatever you came here to offer. If Daniel wants to make a different settlement proposal, he can do it through Garrett Walsh's office, and Patricia will respond." "We're not here about a settlement," Daniel said, and now the edge in his voice was sharper, the reasonableness more openly strained. "We're here because if you keep pursuing the dissipation claim, I'm going to have no choice but to contest your claim on the premarital contribution. And I want you to understand what that means. That could tie this up for 18 months, maybe more. Is that really what you want? 2 years of your life in litigation?" There it was, not a peace offering, a threat dressed in the language of concern. "You'd need to disprove a wire transfer confirmation from a bank account that predates our marriage," I said. "Your attorney has seen the document. I think he's already told you that's not a strong position." The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. It had a texture to it. Frustration, and beneath the frustration, something I recognized as recalculation. "You've changed," Daniel said. It came out almost involuntarily, as if he hadn't meant to say it. "Yes," I said. "Go home, Daniel." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked back to his car. Kristen Mercer looked at me once more, and the calibrated empathy was gone now, replaced by something colder and more honest. And then she followed him. I stood in my driveway and watched them drive away. My hands were in my jacket pockets, and I noticed, when I pulled them out, that they were slightly unsteady. Just slightly. My heart rate was elevated. The confrontation had cost me something. Some expenditure of the composure I'd been building and maintaining for weeks. But the fear, because it was fear, I won't pretend otherwise, didn't spread. It located itself precisely in my chest and then, almost immediately, began to transform, because I had faced it and I had not moved. I had stood in my own driveway in my own garden, with my own evidence in a cloud account and my own attorney in West Hartford, and I had not given them a single thing. I went back to the tomatoes. Miles watched me from the porch. The season was winding down, but it wasn't over yet. The hearing was scheduled for the 3rd week of October in the Hartford County Superior Court. A room that looked exactly like you'd imagine. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, the low, bureaucratic hum of a machine that has processed thousands of lives before yours and will process thousands more. I arrived 20 minutes early with Patricia, wearing a navy blazer and flat shoes, carrying a leather folder with nothing in it except my notes and a small bottle of water. Daniel and Garrett Walsh were already seated at the opposite table. Kristen Mercer was not present. She had no legal standing to be. But I knew she was waiting somewhere nearby because Daniel checked his phone twice in the 5 minutes before proceedings began, in a way that was involuntary and revealing. Patricia had spent 2 weeks preparing me for this hearing. She'd walked me through the likely sequence of arguments, the documents that would be entered into evidence, the questions I'd be asked. She had also, on our last call before the hearing, said something I wrote down. Courts don't reward hysteria, and they don't reward charm. They reward documentation. She paused. You have the best documentation I've seen in a case this size. Let it do the work. The hearing opened with Garrett Walsh's argument that my premarital contribution claim was unsubstantiated, that the funds used in the 2016 down payment could not be conclusively traced to a premarital account. It was the same position he'd staked out in September. He was polished about it, careful, citing precedents in equitable distribution cases. Patricia introduced the bank records in response. The wire transfer confirmation dated 3 weeks before the wedding, from an account opened in 2008 in my name alone, to the title company. She introduced 6 years of premarital statements showing the account's consistent balance. She introduced the account opening documents. She introduced the title company's receipt. Walsh had no response to the paper trail he'd already seen. His rebuttal was brief, and it seemed to me dispirited. Then came Diane. Diane Chen, the forensic accountant, was 50 years old and spoke in the precise, unhurried cadence of someone who had appeared in court many times and found it neither intimidating nor dramatic. She presented her findings methodically. 3 years of joint financial records, $23,400 in identified dissipated marital assets. She walked the court through each category, the recurring property management charge, itemized by month, the restaurant charges, The Newport weekend cross-referenced with Daniel's work conference claim against his employer's reimbursement records, which showed no approved conference travel in that period. Walsh cross-examined her for 40 minutes. He challenged her methodology. He suggested alternate interpretations of several charges. Diane answered every question in the same even tone, with specific reference to the documentation, and did not give him a single opening. Then Daniel was called to testify. I watched him take the seat and adjust the microphone and fold his hands on the railing. He had been coached. You could see it. Walsh had prepared him for this, the same way Patricia had prepared me. He was going to be reasonable, measured, the version of himself he'd tried to deploy in my driveway. Patricia approached him. She began with simple, factual questions. Employment, income, the timeline of the marriage. He answered easily. Then she shifted. Mr. Calloway, are you familiar with the property management company identified in your joint credit card statements from November of last year through July of this year? A pause. Yes. Can you explain the nature of that expense to the court? It was. I was renting a space, a secondary space, for personal reasons. Personal reasons. Patricia didn't inflect the phrase as a question. She simply placed it in the room. And were you living in that space at any point during those 9 months? Not primarily. I was staying there occasionally. Was another person residing in that space during those 9 months? Another pause. Longer. Yes. Was that person's rent subsidized by the payments made from your joint marital credit card account? Walsh was on his feet. Objection. Leading. The judge overruled him. Yes or no, Mr. Calloway, Patricia said. Daniel looked at his hands. Yes. To clarify for the court, you used funds from a joint account, to which your wife, Rachel Calloway, was an equal contributor, to pay for housing occupied by a person with whom you were conducting an extramarital relationship. Is that accurate? A very long silence. Yes, he said. His voice had gone flat. And then, and I believe this was the moment everything turned irrevocably, Patricia placed a document in front of him, a single page. Mr. Calloway, I'm showing you what has been entered as Exhibit 14. Can you tell the court what this is? He looked at it. His jaw tightened. It's a text message, he said. Can you read the relevant portion to the court, please? Walsh objected again. The judge overruled him again. Daniel read it. The text was from his own phone in November of last year to Kristen Mercer's number. Don't worry about the next month's payment. I'll handle it. She never looks at the statements. The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms become quiet when something definitive has been said. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at the middle distance above the judge's bench, and I felt nothing dramatic, no triumph. No grief, just the clean, conclusive feeling of something that has been uncertain for months, finally resolving into a fixed and known shape. She never looks at the statements. He had built his entire scheme on an assumption about me, and the assumption had been wrong. The judge's ruling came 6 weeks after the hearing, on a Tuesday morning in early December. Patricia called me at 8:45 to read it over the phone. I was standing in my kitchen in my coat, about to leave for school. I took the coat off and sat down. The ruling was 23 pages. Patricia gave me the substance. The premarital contribution was recognized in full. My documented separate property entitled me to a proportionally larger share of the home equity. The house was awarded to me, with the mortgage to be refinanced in my name alone. Daniel would receive no equity claim. The dissipated marital assets, $23,400 as documented by Diane Chen, were awarded to me as an offset against the liquid asset division. His share was reduced accordingly. The retirement accounts my 403b awarded to me in full. His 401k divided, with 60% assigned to me via a QDRO, in recognition of the dissipation finding and the disparity in our respective retirement positions. Total outcome: I retained the house, my full retirement account, 60% of his, and a cash offset for the dissipated assets. Daniel walked away with 40% of his own retirement account, his car, and his personal belongings. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after Patricia finished. She asked if I had questions. I said no, I just needed a minute. Then I got up, put my coat back on, and drove to school. For Daniel, the aftermath was immediate. He was required to vacate the guest room within 30 days. His financial position was significantly diminished. A reduced retirement account, no claim on 11 years of home equity, and the personal debt accumulated maintaining the Sunday apartment. Garrett Walsh's fees were substantial. Kristen Mercer had no direct legal exposure. She was not a party to the proceedings. But Exhibit 14 was a matter of public record, and Daniel's acknowledgement in open court that he had subsidized her rent using joint marital funds had consequences that moved through ordinary channels. I did not engineer those consequences. I didn't call anyone or post anything. The court record was public. People found their way to the information themselves. What I had understood from the beginning was that I didn't need to destroy anyone. I just needed to protect myself. The rest was natural consequence, the kind that follows when a structure built on concealment is exposed to ordinary light. Daniel moved out on a Thursday in mid-January. I arranged to be at Margot's house that day, not out of inability to face it, but because I'd made a deliberate decision about how to spend the hours in which that chapter closed. Margot made pasta. We watched a documentary. I slept on her couch and woke feeling, for the first time in months, something adjacent to peace. When I came home Friday afternoon, the guest room was empty. His books were gone from the shelves. The kitchen was exactly as I kept it. Miles and Coltrane moved through the house with their usual indifference. I stood in the doorway of the guest room for a moment. It was just a room. Then I went and looked at the garden, dormant under the first frost, and thought about what I was going to plant in the spring. That evening I poured a glass of wine and sat in my living room with Miles on my lap and thought about the text message. She never looks at the statements. The casual confidence of it. The architecture of an assumption. I looked at the empty shelves and thought, 11 years of looking at everything. And in the end, what had undone him was the certainty that I wouldn't. Spring came early that year, or at least it felt that way. By late February, I had the seed catalog spread across the kitchen table, planning the expanded beds I'd thought about in December. I added basil and tarragon along the south fence, a row of dahlias at the far end of the garden that served no practical purpose, but made me happy every time I looked at them. The garden that spring was the best it had ever been. The refinancing went through in March. The mortgage was in my name alone, and the particular feeling that produced, not smugness, nothing like that, was more like the feeling of a knot you've stopped trying to untie finally releasing on its own. I taught better that semester. When you've been carrying a concealed weight for months, setting it down changes what you can do with your hands. One of my juniors, the one who'd written about the green light in Gatsby, placed second in the state literary competition. I was disproportionately delighted. In April, Margot introduced me to a colleague of her husband's, a civil engineer named Paul, soft-spoken and genuinely funny, who had also been through a difficult divorce. We had dinner once, then twice. Slow and careful and completely appropriate. I wasn't looking for anything. I was simply open for the first time in years to what might be available. Laura visited in June and told me, with the directness that only sisters can manage, that I seemed like a different person than the one she'd spoken to in August. I told her I thought I probably was, not unrecognizably so, just more like myself. I heard about Daniel through ordinary channels, shared acquaintances, professional networks, the smallness of geographic communities. He had left his firm in the spring. The combination of the public court record and the distraction of an 18-month legal proceeding had not left his professional life unchanged. He was freelancing from a small apartment in a different part of Hartford. Kristen Mercer had moved out of the Sunday apartment sometime in the winter. The relationship between her and Daniel had not survived the proceedings. I thought about this sometimes, not with satisfaction, but with quiet recognition. A relationship built on concealment doesn't tend to thrive when exposed to consequence. The conditions that had sustained it were gone. Miles died in July. Old age, the slow winding down of a cat who had been loved well. I cried more than I expected to. By August, 1 year exactly from the Sunday that had changed everything, I was standing in my garden with a cup of coffee looking at the dahlias, orange and deep red and one variety that was almost black. Paul had been there for dinner the night before. I'd listened to him talk about a bridge project with genuine interest, which struck me afterward as a small but significant data point about where I was. 1 year. From the phone on the counter to this garden, this morning, this life. He had been wrong about me. He had always been wrong about me. And that, in the end, was the most important fact. I didn't plan to become someone who rebuilt her life at 41, but here I am. What I learned is this. Composure is not passivity. Documentation is not coldness. And knowing your own worth, precisely legally, financially, is not ruthlessness. It's survival. He thought I wasn't paying attention. That was his only mistake, and it was the only one that mattered. If you had been standing in my kitchen that August morning, holding that phone, what would you have done? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below, and if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more to come. Thank you for listening.